Opioid addiction is a national public health crisis that affects individuals and families regardless of their age, race, or income. The statistics are overwhelming. More than 130 people die from opioid addiction every day. But there is hope. Recovery is possible. The information contained in these podcasts is solely for informational purposes and should not replace advice from a medical provider when making healthcare decisions. This podcast contains opinionated content and may not reflect the opinions of any organization this podcast is affiliated with. Nothing discussed in this podcast shall constitute or should be construed as endorsement by the Independence Blue Cross Foundation or Independence Blue Cross, LLC, of any product or service discussed herein. We will discuss opioid use and opioid treatment, which may be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is suffering from opioid addiction, please visit ibxfoundation.org/SYK. The link is in our show notes below. In Season 4, we are joined by so many inspiring guests who are sharing their story of connectedness, the theme of this season. And today, on Someone You Know, we're joined by Pennsylvania Montgomery County Commissioner Jamila Winder for our first live podcast, recording with the studio audience. In this conversation, the Commissioner covers everything from the vast career she's had, spanning various roles in health and human services, particularly with underserved populations, and more intimately, she shares about the personal connection that influenced the choice to join this line of work, as well as the innovative and strategic ways Montgomery County is striving to use the opioid settlement dollars to make a real impact. Montgomery County's plan for crisis response centers and collegiate recovery programs, and how 4 institutions in Montgomery County alone have implemented this program. The importance of connection in the substance use recovery journey. And then we conclude with a Q&A session with our live audience and Commissioner Winder. I'm your host, Heather Major, and this is Someone You Know. Today is going to be a lot of fun for us and the production crew that are behind you because you're our first studio audience. It's our 4th season of the Someone You Know podcast. First time we're ever with a studio audience. And so you're part of now a global audience of listeners, and that is pretty darn exciting. So our company, obviously, and through our foundation, we're glad to be working with you on important issues that are affecting the people of Montgomery County. But let's start with your background, because not just education, you've got a lot of health and human service in your background, and you're obviously dedicated to public service. Love to hear a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here live. So I'm glad to be the guinea pig for the live studio.
You're going to be the one and only, not the guinea, the one and only.
The one and only.
Yes.
I feel really special now. So look, my parents moved us to Montgomery County when I was 5. I promise you I'm not going to tell the 40-year journey of my life in Montgomery County. But you know, there was a moment. I had been working professionally for, let's say, 13, 14 years. I was working at Drexel University. I was an executive there, and there was a moment where I was like, you know what, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough to give back to my community. I was making enough money that I could own a home and I could give back to my parents, but I knew that I could give of my time and talent in different ways. And so I set out to be able to give back to my community. Now, my parents modeled that for me as I was growing up. My mom was an educator in Philly for almost 4 decades. My grandmother was also an educator, 9th grade English teacher in Philly. So between the two of them, 7 decades of service to children. And then, believe it or not, my dad was a warden at one of our state correctional facilities. So you can imagine, like, growing up, like, who was the harder parent? It was my mother, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't the warden. So like service was modeled for me, and I knew, like, at that point where that life wasn't just about like paying bills, being self-serving and doing things for yourself. It was about doing for others. And so I was with Big Brothers Big Sisters for 10 years. I served on a board for women dealing with substance use, and then, you know, one day, I think it was 2016, I went to my dad. I was like, you know what, I'm going to run for school board. And he's like, well, do you even know what running for school board entails? I was like, no. But I know that I want to give back to a district that did so much for me. So that's really was the catalyst to being in an elected office and bringing about like a different model for how electeds should show up for their communities. So I was on the school board. I was a supervisor in my hometown. I was the first Black person to ever serve in that capacity. And then in 2023, I was just fortunate enough to be appointed to fill a vacancy in 2023. So
I do want to talk about your lifelong ties to Montgomery County.
Sure.
Because you've just mentioned you're a community member, a parent, a public official, a county leader.
Yeah.
How has your lifelong ties to Montgomery County really helped you connect to the needs of our neighbors?
Yeah, it's I always say that I'm not your father's commissioner, right? So I'm not necessarily for the people that came before me in the role. My lived experiences are not the same as theirs. Doesn't mean that their experience wasn't valuable. We wouldn't be the county we are today if it weren't for them. But growing up in Montgomery County and given the experiences that I had access to, I really got a front row seat to really what makes Montgomery County a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but also understanding the work that still needed to be done to ensure that we have equity in our schools, to ensure that we're fighting for the most vulnerable among us. And I think and I know we'll talk a little bit about my family's journey, but there was a aha moment for me when I had the opportunity to step up as commissioner. One of the things that has shaped me is my brother's own experience, and he was the rock star of the family, right? Went to Penn State on a full scholarship, graduated leadership development program at Raytheon. And then, we got a call when he started working that he was fired from his job, getting kicked out of his apartment because he became addicted to opioids. So, so think about, like I talked about, like my upbringing, my parents, and what they modeled for us, and then the power of community and education that really helped to raise me in conjunction with what my parents did. So we had all these blessings, right, throughout our journey, like living in Montgomery County. And every day that I come to work, it's about bringing my lived experiences coupled with listening to other people's lived experiences to make the right decisions for the residents of Montgomery County.
You've got a lot of community health initiatives underway in Montgomery County and that you're leading. Mm-hmm. So if you don't mind, can we talk about opioid settlement dollars first? Because I think there's a rightful curiosity about how there's a lot of money and a lot of longitudinal opportunity with those dollars, but being in the funding space myself doesn't solve the problems.
Right.
So really curious how both the mechanics and the process that's happening in Montgomery County and also what you're focused on with intention with those dollars.
Sure. I'm really grateful that we now have these opioid settlement dollars and that the pharmaceutical manufacturers were held to account for the significant impact that the opioid crisis has had on many people in this room, my family included. And now we're at this moment where we can really think through innovative and strategic ways to use those dollars to make real impact. And I'll tell you, it's just one of the things for me personally that I've just prioritized we have a process post-COVID. When we got ARPA dollars, we established a recovery office, and that team was really designed to help us manage the significant dollars that were coming in as a result of COVID. And we're using that same model to manage the opioid settlement dollars. And because we want to take a community-centered approach, we don't want to allocate those dollars in a vacuum. But we want to be intentional about how do we invest in programming that will actually move the needle. And how do we invest in programming that historically either has, and I'll give an example, either has maybe not been taken seriously or not fully understood, but really just taking a deep look at, our recovery community and what programs, where are their gaps, and what programs do we need to be using those dollars to support? So I'll give an example. So my brother my brother was incarcerated, and he did an 18 to 36 month sentence in one of our state correctional facilities as a result of his addiction. And he immediately went to, when he got out of state prison, he was immediately sent to a halfway house. And shortly after going to that halfway house, mind you, not too far from Kensington, the state-run halfway house, he relapsed. And I found myself in Kensington, shortly after becoming commissioner, in Kensington looking for my brother on the streets of Kensington. We were fortunate enough that we found him. We were able to get him into a facility, right, to do a program. And then, this is a long-winded way of saying this, and then we got him into a sober living house, right? And a lot of those, in Montgomery County especially, a lot of the sober living programs or recovery houses have historically not been supported by government entities. In the spirit of the opioid settlement dollars, we have people that are now applying for those dollars that are running successful recovery communities that need additional help to ensure that those programs continue to run. Had it not been for Unity Sober Living, my brother, wouldn't be 18 months clean and sober. Right. And so we're really taking those opioid settlement dollars and just thinking about how do we invoke systemic change and invest in programs that change people's lives. And it's not just my brother's example in that sober living, but think about the criminal justice system, right? When people leave our county prison and they have a substance use disorder, right? That doesn't go away because they've served their 6 or 12-month sentence. And I think we do an inadequate job of reentry. And so we're looking at reentry programs for those that are leaving our criminal justice system or are in our criminal justice system and using opioid dollars to invest in that. So we've got, I don't even know the number, but we've just done this last round of funding applications. And there are probably 50 applications for organizations that are trying to expand their work and can expand their work without additional funding. Yeah. So I hope that was helpful.
It's a great answer because that's always the common question is who's receiving the dollars? The dollars are significant. Are they having impact? Who are they helping? How are they helping? And I think that your really practical approach to finding the right places where the dollars are going to make the most sense for the organizations that are doing the kind of work that is both preventative.
That's right.
But it's also really recovery focused.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're very fortunate that in the provider space, there are lots of providers and lots of ways for individuals to enter whatever door they come through, enter treatment. But you really can't say the same for recovery.
Right.
And that's really the longer part of many people and families' journey that needs to be supported in different ways. So it is encouraging that you're taking such a laser focus on where you're seeing gaps and where you're seeing opportunity.
That's right.
Crisis response centers. We're lucky; these are starting to really take traction in our counties as much as they have been in the city of Philadelphia. Would love to know more about Montgomery County's plans for the crisis response center. I mean, they're necessary, right? As long as humans walk the earth, we're going to need places where people can go when they are really at the end of, their line.
Listen, and we know that addiction goes hand in hand with mental health, right? My brother had a dual diagnosis that went untreated, and it wasn't until he was an adult that we found out he had bipolar disorder, and it was coupled with his addiction. And so, one of the things that we did with those ARPA dollars is we invested $18 million in a behavioral health crisis center. Because believe it or not, I don't know if anybody in the audience lives in Montgomery County. We know that your acute care hospitals, your hospitals where people are going for emergencies, are being flooded with adults and children that are in crisis, and that our behavioral health system in Montgomery County and quite candidly across the state is strained. And so we are set to open a walk-in crisis center, servicing both adults. There'll be 5 beds for children. And the idea is that we have a responsibility to take the strain off of your acute care hospitals and ensure that there's a place where people can go, where there are the appropriate professionals, clinicians and the like, that know how to address someone in crisis. I can't tell you how many times my brother ended up at the ER at Einstein Hospital in Norristown because there was nowhere for him to go, right? And so now we have an opportunity where we're making this investment, and families, instead of going to the ER, can come to this crisis center 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We can focus on getting people stabilized, coming up with a plan. Children can actually stay longer because we know there's a juvenile challenge in Montgomery County. But that was one of the first actions that we took when we ushered in a new administration last year. Was really, we've hired a vendor, we've identified a location. The challenge though that we're facing is the future of funding, right? Making sure that we can sustain the model, and that's what we're tinkering with now, because it's it's really expensive to run a crisis center like that. But we're proud that we're making headway towards opening that crisis center.
Well, we'll have to keep talking about what that looks like and the coordination it looks like across the counties, as well as more counties like yours and under your leadership stand up crisis centers. We're seeing really great results in Philadelphia,
Amazing.
Especially in the pediatric population, and that can transform the lifespan.
Absolutely.
It's really incredible work, but we're not done. Of course, we're not done. You're never done. We're not done. The Norristown Shelter for Traditional Housing, or Transitional Housing, excuse me. That's important. You got a lot of headlines but it wasn't the headlines because it was happening. It was the headlines because people were supporting it, and there's a little bit of a difference. So, in the news sense, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And I mean, this really hits close to home for you.
Absolutely, and I'm still tired from the zoning hearing board that we went through.
So maybe not
last
everyone
Wednesday.
was as supportive, but
but we cleared a significant hurdle. So
Totally.
I mean, we know that housing should be a basic right, and that everyone who lives in the second wealthiest county in this Commonwealth should have a safe place to lay their head at night. Yet we've got, at any given time, 450 to 500 people living on the streets. A lot of them concentrated in the Norristown area. And being as though I'm from the Norristown area, that was like one of the number one things that I heard. The state had closed a single adult shelter, and it was a shelter, cots in a room, in 2021. And we haven't had a solution since. In that area. So what we saw was, eviction filings were like more than 1,300 last year. What we saw is, I did a point in time count with my husband on like the coldest night of the year. Over 100 people sleeping on the streets in Norristown, under bridges and encampments. And so, early on in my tenure, I went to the borough, and the borough, like we spent like 10 months really workshopping like what an ideal state could look like. How do we still focus on revitalizing the community of Norristown, our county seat, but also we have a responsibility to our most vulnerable friends and neighbors, regardless of if they've been here for 6 months or 6 years. And so we had to get a zoning variance. We had to identify a location, a zoning variance. And we did a 6-hour zoning hearing board last Wednesday. A couple, it was testimony, right? Like talking about our plans, why we picked that particular location, answering really hard questions. And I think our model was a little different this time, because this is not the first time we've gone before zoning hearing boards for either affordable housing or a transitional housing facility. What was different is I stood up in front of that zoning hearing board. I was a part of the testimony, and I said, this is something that I know we need to do. I'm putting my name on it, and I'm committed to the community in ensuring that we do this program and we help our most vulnerable, but we also protect public safety. Because that was the big issue, right? Like, are my home values going to decline?
Sure.
Am I going to have people loitering outside of my home? And I think we made a really compelling case, and I couldn't have done it without the Borough of Norristown, my amazing county team, and then just the broader community saying, like, what's a better alternative, right? Just leaving people or stepping over people that find themselves on the streets, or better yet, I met a guy, his house got condemned, right? And he had like 48 hours to get out of his house and had nowhere to go, right? So everyone that's sleeping, like everyone that finds themselves unhoused is not necessarily the person sleeping under the bridge, right? And so I'm proud of this because like it helps this addiction, this recovery community too, right? It helps when people land on the streets because they have an addiction or because they have a mental health challenges. We're not just giving them the housing, we're doing the wraparound services as well. So I'm just like, I literally 12:39 when they said we approve, I almost started crying.
I bet.
Because I've seen these people that deserve a place to lay their head at night, deserve a place to shower, to leave their belongings, and guess what? When they have those things, then
other doors open,
yeah. Right? They can focus on the other, but that's like a basic need. So I'm just proud of our team for getting us over.
And it's incredible. And I hope that you continue to be congratulated and applauded on not just the outcome, but the effort. I mean, that is tremendous. I also think it really does tie into stigma. I mean, having to convince someone that housing is important, I don't think that's the case you have to make. I think the case is the stigma of why we should do it, why it matters, and it is just an incredible feat. So that's a lot, and those are very recent things that you're working on and working towards. I want to switch gears if we can.
Okay, sure.
Talk a little bit about collegiate recovery because it is one of our most proudest achievements. Now I feel like it's very inadequate compared to all the things you're doing. But
no, not at all.
But we at Independence Blue Cross Foundation, as I had shared, we invested very early on in trying to prevent and treat the opioid addiction, and we quickly realized that what happens when people go into recovery, what happens specifically to a generation of younger people who want to maintain their recovery and feel left out of education and higher education specifically. And so we realized early on that we could play a leading role. And I think this touches on some of your past too in the education space. We looked at the data, and I know you're a data person, you've mentioned it a few times today. We looked at the data, and nationally, Pennsylvania was ranked one of the last states in terms of number of collegiate recovery programs. But we have tons of higher education institutions in our state. I know you and I share the Penn State connection. And our work at the Independence Blue Cross Foundation has historically, with higher education, been for nursing, which we're still there. And so we thought this is an opportunity. So we went from the last state in the country to the first state in the country, fastest growing and now the nation's leader, by supporting the expansion or establishment of collegiate recovery programs at 17 colleges and universities.
Amazing.
That's all it took. But the best part about that isn't necessarily the number or the result. It's that now we have a very strong group of partners who are all about promoting inclusive recovery on college campuses, enabling those students to earn college degrees in a safe and supportive environment. So that's been sort of a theme today, right? And obviously breaking down the stigma along the way. And then, as our colleague Leah pointed out, the students are actually graduating and moving into that SUD pipeline as peer specialists or going on to be social workers or therapists or founding organizations like Unity Recovery. So, I mean, this is really it's an investment. It's an investment that we've made. So I hope you'll be as proud of this as we are. 4 of those schools, those 17 schools, are in Montgomery County.
Amazing. Give me the names.
I'm going to give you the rundown, yeah. Harcum College,
Okay.
Penn State Abington, Ursinus College, and Montgomery County Community College.
Beautiful.
They're not all alike, right? These are very
different.
different schools. They reach very different students. They attract students for very different reasons, but they've all committed to this work, which is pretty incredible. So when you think about the partnerships that you've formed and sort of the relationships that you need to, draw on and draw down on whenever you're trying to get things across the goal line, big things.
Right.
What do you think about that kind of a collaborative partnership for collegiate recovery? What comes to your mind?
So that's really great to hear. I actually just became a trustee at the Montgomery County Community College,
Good.
and so I'll have to go back and learn more about that program. And some of our opioid settlement dollars to date have gone to the Penn State program as well. And what I would say is, when substance use starts early. I didn't realize that my brother started dabbling in high school, and he struggled all throughout college. We had no idea. And so I think the fact that these programs have grown and are growing, it's sad that, our youngest residents, are struggling with addiction, but we have to meet people where they are. And so creating an environment, I think about if my brother had that support and also wasn't afraid to tell us that he was struggling when he was in college, would the trajectory of his life be different? And so I know that drugs and drinking on college campuses is, a significant.
Normalized, yeah.
It's normalized. It's a thing. I don't think I didn't drink until I actually went to college and went to a frat party, right? And it can quickly spiral. So I would love to be an advocate to getting all of our college campuses in Montgomery County to be a part of this work. It's just.
We would love to work with you on that, for sure.
I'm happy to
That'd
partner
be great.
on that.
And we're very encouraged to know that you're actually already thinking ahead about you're already using opioid settlement dollars for that. And that is something that we want to see, because it's great for us to help establish and expand these programs, but they need to be able to be sustained. And these schools have made a tremendous commitment to not just their students, but it's faculty, it's students, it's families. And it's their futures.
And I would say it is about also prevention, right? You've got your community that's in recovery, and we want them to stay in recovery on college campuses. But we also need to do more programming, in high school, in middle school, in college, and programming that's about prevention, because you never know, there's somebody sitting in that audience that may have been, struggling and didn't want to speak up.
It really is someone you know.
Right. It really is.
It really comes back to that. That's right.
For sure.
That's right. I'm going to give a plug to our company, because I think the theme of this season is about connection, and Independence just launched its Better Together campaign. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it really is around encouraging connection, social cohesion as an antidote to loneliness.
Right.
And it really, our conversation today, really, the common themes are sort of there, right? That substance use disorder is an isolating disease. It's something that people don't want to talk about, but need to talk about. Recovery communities are a very supportive environment. But there aren't enough of them wherever you go. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You've got tremendous experience and background, but I want to hear your thoughts on connection in the substance use journey and maintaining recovery, and how you feel about campaigns like Better Together.
So first, I want to applaud Independence Blue Cross. I always stress this idea that we can't do it in isolation, and we can't do it in a vacuum. So we are truly better together. And what I've found, just kind of making that transition from the private sector to the public sector, is there's a lot of organizations out there doing amazing work, but oftentimes that work is being done in silos, sure. Right? So when you have a complex issue like the opioid crisis, you're making like incremental change with different organizations. The power and the reach that Independence has, could be game changing if it's partnered with the right stakeholders. And so I've been stressing this idea of togetherness. We're all in this together. We all have to be a part of the solution. And I think what you're talking about is you guys are modeling that. So
thanks. Well, we do it with your partnership, with
course.
your great partnership, and no one left behind, right? I really want to thank you for being here with us. And if there's anything else you want to say to the audience, but I know you're generous with your time today, and we wanted to open for some questions before we close, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And I would just say, I want to thank all of you. I don't know your individual stories, but I'm looking into each of your respective eyes, and I'm sure you could share similar stories. And there was a moment when I was running for office, and I wasn't doing this for to be the next governor of Pennsylvania. I was really doing it because I wanted to make my community a better place, and I wanted to ensure that people like me and people like my family had a voice at the table. And I was, when I was running in 2023, I was really scared to share my family's story, because I was afraid, like, what if people won't vote for me, right? What if people will judge me or use my brother's kind of past history to discount my ability to lead? And I would say people did, try to do that. But I want to say to all of you, I think we all have to be brave in telling our collective story. And I finally found the courage to just be open and honest about what my family went through and how it helps to inform the work that I do, and it makes me a different kind of leader. And so I don't know all of your stories, but what I just would say to you, I'm sure you have mirror stories or deeper stories, and the fact that you all are convening in this way and you talk about this openly as a community, that takes a lot of courage. So I just want to honor that in this moment.
You can clap.
Yeah.
The clapping is fine. I can edit claps out, or we'll keep them in. Questions? Anyone have questions for the commissioner?
Yeah. First of all, hi, my name is Brianna. Thank you so much for all of your work. The things we talked about today are all topics that are near and dear to my heart, as well as I'm sure it is for many people in this room. I can tell from your personal experience and the way you speak about it that you don't look at it as a problem that needs to be solved, but as people that need to be helped. Which is really, really important when you're working with these types of sensitive topics. I know you talked a little bit about this board hearing that you just finalized, and I'm sure you're met with a lot of people who look at these as inconveniences as opposed to, again, things that need to be helped. And I'm curious how you approach that and how you have those conversations.
Well, listen, first, thank you for your question. And look, I'm human too, right? And so, when you're in those types of meetings where things can get contentious, people ask questions in ways that you're like, that's like super demeaning, right? And so I found myself in those moments just like trying to be still and just center myself on the ignorance that I was hearing. And that's what it is, right? And so what I typically tend to do is after that meeting, I went up to the naysayers, right? A couple of the people that had come to bring about their concerns, and they just wanted they just wanted somebody to listen to them. And then I just have to correct, right, the misinformation that people are spewing. And at the end of the day, I do believe that there are more people that want to help than not. It's just we have to help people better understand what we're trying to solve, and that these are our friends and neighbors. And we have a responsibility to love thy neighbor, right? And I lead with that example, even when people are being not so nice about the things that we're attempting to do. So I want to leave you all with one more thing. So I lost my mother a year ago in April, and she was sick. 3-4 years. Mitch, we talked about this a little bit. I lost my mother and grandmother in the same week, April last year. And one of the things that my mother spent, the later years of her life doing was trying to save my brother. And I don't know how many mothers we have in here that have loved, a child through addiction, but that's all my mother wanted, was for her son to be clean and sober, healthy and happy. While we lost her in April, she was able to see my brother be clean and sober. So she held on until he got out of prison. She held on while he was working on his recovery. And it just was amazing as we were by her bedside saying our goodbyes. She was able to see her son happy, healthy, and sober. So,
it's amazing.
Yeah, so those really, really want to leave you with that positive. It's a little depressing, but
so you told me we weren't going to cry today.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make anybody cry, but it's like mothers or loved ones that have loved people through addiction, right? And all my mom ever wanted, right? So I remind him, when he's struggling in his recovery, that you're making mommy so proud, right? Because you've been able to maintain your sobriety even through the darkest hours, and that she was able to see you sober. So
I can't think of a better way to say thank you and to really drive home the theme of connection and its importance in substance use disorder and all that we do by making that really personal connection with your brother and your mom. So thanks for giving us that gift.
Of course.
If you or someone you know is suffering from opioid addiction, please visit ibxfoundation.org/SYK. The link is in our show notes below.